Let's look at steering to targets in construction. I'm going to do that just using the report of, I keep leaning this large Sutter Health Hospital project in the middle of San Francisco. And it's from that project. And you can see that they have goals for safety, what they call people, quality, production and schedule, and then cost. And I don't want to go through the whole thing in detail, but basically the arrows on the red arrows pointing up and the green arrows pointing or going up or down are trend lines. They're looking at the trend over time. And so that they're trying to track exactly where they are and where they're headed. And perhaps in the service of my comment about the triple bottom line of sustainability, they have obviously safety. All of them tend to have interpenetrating implications, right? Economic, social, and environmental. Safety, for example, is one of those. Obviously, we don't want people to be hurt, so it has a social dimension, but it also has an economic dimension because projects that have accidents that cost money, right? And then if you look at the another social goal with or target with social implications, it's a number of local business enterprises on the project, and also local resident employee. So it's in providing local employment as you're meeting an economic need. And also there's an environmental dimension to project team use of alternative transportation. So they wanted that half the people travel using public transport, right? Or reduce the load on the traffic system, obviously, and also reduce the load, the carbon dioxide emissions, and other noxious gases into the atmosphere. And the others are, as you can see, pretty straightforward: quality, production, and so forth. So, not to go into it in great detail, but if obviously steering to targets, you have to have a target, you have to be able to measure it, right? And you have to understand where you are in relationship to it at any moment in time in order to know how to move your steering wheel, right, and towards your desired destination. So I will go on. So I wanted to just take a question that probably someone's going to have, and if you don't, you should. Right? Can TBD be done without some form of collaborative contracting, integrated project delivery or project alliancing, right? And the answer is that yes, it can be done without integrated project delivery, heavy or light. And if you will. The company that I'm going to talk about in connection with our TBD research, Hatala, our Finnish company, they've done all of their projects, design, bid, build, without shared risk and reward commercial terms. Now, that said, I think there's good reason to believe that having those collaborative contracts even further enhances the beneficial impact of TBD. So, and here's some reasons for it. First of all, just this idea that setting targets is not just random forecasting, right? Or not random forecast, but trying to forecast relatively random events like the weather, right? But rather it's a matter of agreeing to goals and committing to doing what's needed in order to meet them, right? And so that, I think, is what happens when we're in the setting targets mode. And here's a hypothesis: the willingness of project players to commit to goals is higher when they participate in setting them and when they have a stake in their achievement. And I think that's why project alliancing, integrated project delivery projects have been so successful in meeting or beating challenging targets. But that kind of takes us into this territory of of collaborative contracting. And if you're interested in future, we could have even a separate session devoted to thinking about and learning about those. But I will go on. Okay, so so we saw then that 2012, if you go back and remember just a few minutes ago, almost an hour ago, I talked about Sutter Health giving a report on their 22 lean projects of more than $10 million. That was done in, I think, August of 2012. And in that same, just 2 or 3 months later, their first acute care hospital was completed. And this is the Eden Medical Center Replacement Hospital. You can see, this is, of course, a rendering. I believe it is. Maybe it's maybe a photograph. But so, but this is kind of another level of challenge. $9 million budget, 130 beds, completion in that time. So here's how they did. They completed ahead of schedule and under budget with no compromise to space program or sustainability goals. Construction rework varied by trade between 15 and 80% less than trade baselines. Productivity 5 to 20% greater than trade baselines. And then this is an interesting one from a design perspective. Mechanical and plumbing installed exactly to the model 99% of the time. And I'll show you a picture that supports that. Fewer RFIs, requests for information, change orders and failed inspections than on Sutter legacy projects, and tool time significantly higher than industry standards. Tool time refers to capacity utilization, right? So what percentage of paid labor time is spent doing productive work? And here's that comparison. And I'm sure you have such examples to show of your own. But this was 2012, right? So no, I'm not going to allow myself the luxury of telling a story because I really want to get to the current research report. So, okay, again on the question of steering. So you can see here that, and this was an integrated project delivery project. And so for those who may not remember or know, on such projects, there's shared risk and reward. And that means that while for all the design and construction companies involved, those in the risk pool, or some people outside the risk pool because their work wasn't highly integrated into the delivery of the project, could be cordoned off, if you will. But most people were in the. You can see that if I could point, I guess I don't think I have a pointer here. So under shared profit status, that shows the stake that each of the members of the risk pool, each of those companies, design and construction, have in the project, right? And so they're tracking what they could. The green represents the maximum they could make if everything goes well and they deliver the project on target, right? And the red is where they are now in terms of relative to that goal. Right? And then if you look at the bottom right quadrant, risk and opportunity tracker. So what they're doing is they've quantified the potential cost impact, negative and positive, of so they're trying to generate sufficient ideas for innovation that will help them offset costs. Right? And then also on the lower left quadrant, IFOA, Integrated Form of Agreement, that's just the name of their contract type, billing projections, right? And interestingly, well, just remember what kind of data is on this report. And this is public, it's published everywhere. Even when you walk into their big meeting room, was not huge, it wasn't hugely big, but big for them. They had over the door for total reduction to reach profit goal. And so what this illustrates is that the client can't just, one of the features of this integrated project delivery approach is that the client is an active participating member of the project team. And if a client can't provide someone who's willing and able to perform that role, then you really shouldn't try to do this kind of an approach. But that client should take as seriously the achievement of profit objectives of the participating companies as the delivery of the project to their specifications, and try to make those one and the same thing. Okay, so more key points. So I won't read them, but you can just see that they're developing. I'm trying to keep up with the presentation. Here's some more. First rule in TVD, second rule in TVD, steering to targets in design, steering to targets in construction. Okay. So I want to TVD, like anything and including lean methods and processes, can go wrong. And I did an anatomy of a project that did go wrong. Although what I found was that the project went wrong in the sense that it was delivered 6% over target cost. On the other hand, it was considered to be fit for purpose. It was considered to be appropriately beautiful, and 6% over budget might be well within the range of tolerance of most projects. So, but they went wrong, and they deserved it. Okay? So this is from another paper that's available also from the for Lean Construction. It's titled "How to Make Shared Risk and Reward Sustainable." And just to say it quickly, I do urge you to read the paper if you're interested in understanding how things can go wrong and what you should do to avoid it. What's weird about this diagram, the red is the target cost and the blue is the expected cost, right? And what is weird is that the scope of the project was bouncing around all over the place, right? But the target cost didn't. And they finally set a target cost when they had already completed design, right? But it was a charade. The client was not actually using the team properly. They were using them as an estimating resource to explore different ways of structuring their master plan, right, for the project. And so they were the guys were working hard, and they did made a noble effort, but they were shooting at a moving target. And so that's a failure in leadership, I think, and it's can be entirely to be avoided. But read the paper for more detail. So here's some critical questions to ask when you're thinking about going into these kinds of shared risk and reward situations. Is the client able and willing to play their role? Okay. And some of those questions are, will you pursue the lean ideal, follow lean principles, and use lean methods and tools? And of course, you have to dig deep to understand if they really understand what they're being asked there. Will you share your project objectives and allowable costs? Sometimes those are hidden, and they still ask people to take on risk, and that's simply unfair, right? And careless on the part of the people who are accepting the risk. Will you strive to assure the profitability of designers and constructors? Will you commit a person with decision-making authority to work day-to-day on the project? But also, are designers and constructors willing and able to play their parts? Yeah, and early, at some point, as experience develops over a number of projects, you have people where you can ask, well, what's your experience, right? But experience is not, not everyone can get experience if only people who have done it can, right, have that opportunity. So I think really the more fundamental question is, are you willing to develop your lean capabilities on this project? So are you willing to put your profit at risk and open your books for reimbursement of cost of work? Are designers willing to include constructors in the design phase of the project? Are constructors willing to learn how to contribute in the design phase of the project? So some more key points just to add those. So the last one here, L, TVD projects can go wrong if TVD principles and processes are not applied. And here's just a short list of reports on TVD project performance that you can follow up on. Now, to anticipate a question, limitations of TVD. And I think that you can make these up yourself. So when projects involve new materials and technologies, that challenges both modeling what's wanted and costing what's modeled, right? When projects change targets in mid-flight, that challenges steering to targets. And when cost escalation is significant and unpredictable, that challenges coming to agreement about risk allocation. But and I'm sure that, but what I would note is that these are problems that aren't peculiar to TVD projects. They're kind of the things you run into all the time, right? So, so what I would say, to use a metaphor, steering a ship to destination is harder in stormy seas, but that doesn't change the fundamentals of steering, right? And I suspect that all of you have ways of dealing with these kinds of problems, right? And so my conclusion is that it's not that TVD doesn't apply, but like every other project, when they have these kinds of characteristics, it's just harder to execute the project. All right, I'm getting there, But sometimes even more fun. On the pieces of paper. Okay. Almost. Okay, finally, this is what I really want to, well, I'm excited to share because it's something new that we're working on. So I think, I'm not sure how long it's been, maybe 3 years. We've had in working a research group on target value delivery. And it's got people from different companies, different parts of the world. And our objective is to discover or develop methods of setting and steering to targets that produce expected costs substantially more accurate than the minus 20% to plus 30% specified in the literature. Okay, and what I mean by produce expected costs as conceptual estimates, from programmatic data prior to design, and to explain the process for delivering projects with such cost accuracy. Okay? So this takes us back to that cost planning conversation earlier. So here's the individuals and their companies that are involved in the research group. I can just say that there's owners, there's researchers, there's constructors, there's designers. Okay, there are people from mostly U.S., Norway, and Finland. Okay, this is and in this we're producing a book the publisher to get them all those manuscripts by the end of the first quarter of next year. So we've got a bunch of them already, and one of them belongs to the cases. The section, chapter 6 is devoted to cases. And this is one from Norway. You may know about this project, the National Police Response Center. And they used a target value delivery approach to design and construct that project. Okay? And it's turned out very, very well. So this is just a listing of some of the must-have requirements from the owner, which is, in this case, it was managed directly by the Department of Finance. I think it was Department of Finance, Norwegian Department of Finance, as opposed to Statsbygg. And I think it was because it was, I think it's going to influence Statsbygg's approach to project delivery. So they set a target cost, maximum allowable cost for the predefined scope of 2.5 billion NOK, Norwegian kroner, in 2015, and then they added a point. They reserved 0.3 billion to fund potential value-adding scope to the project, but they didn't provide it. And I've got a feeling that you either got to be on one project or the other, right? Because if you're so dedicated to hitting an aggressive target of 2.5 billion for the predefined scope, it's difficult to generate the need for the additional money, but you're trying to solve one problem and not another. This is the same as we've been seeing from historic projects, but this is a contemporary one. So this is how the cost moved over time. And you can see that they're coming in under budget, under target, and did. Now, now this is, so that's just a taste of what's going to be, of what's available already, but hasn't yet been published. Available in the sense that it's been produced. So this is a cost report on Hatala's 38 projects that we have data for, and divided between all 38 and then the 10 most recent. And for that division is that Hatala, in about 3 years ago, rolled out their 5th version of their software for generating, for modeling a project based on customer input, programmatic data, the voice of the customer, and then costing that model. Okay? So, and they're getting better over time, as you can see by looking at the numbers. So for all 38, which go back some years and multiple generations of their cost model, they're not a big firm. They don't do a huge number of projects. 0.8% difference between target and cost at completion, minus 0.8, so it's slightly under, with a standard deviation of 4.9, a range between 15% below and 11.6% above, okay? Average under 3.5% and average over 3.3%. But if you look at the 10 most recent, they're getting better, right? And part of that, I think, has to do with the power of the software, and part of it with their own development and competence and steering, right? Using the software. So now their average delta average difference is minus 1.3%. Their standard deviation is 3.2. The range has shrunk to minus 6.6, from minus 6.6 to 2.6 over. Right? So now if you want just to look at technically what the target cost is, a conceptual estimate, right? Is based on a conceptual estimate. And For conceptual estimates, you can look at a number of different standards, if you will, but I've taken this one from the American Society of Testing and Measurement. That standard for conceptual estimates ranges between 20% low and 30% high. Okay? So we think that we found at least one candidate that is significantly better than that. And we think that it's because they're using a different method of doing conceptual estimating. Right? Now, so Taku is the name of their software. I think that in Finnish, I don't read Finnish, but I'm told by my Finnish mates in the research group that means cost model. Maybe so, maybe not. It's a software for producing building information models that takes input from the voice of the customer and produces an estimated cost for what's wanted. So you're not building up an estimate, you're actually costing, you're producing a building information model without a visual readout. And that model can be detailed in terms that are buildable. It specifies in quantities, all different components, materials, and services. Okay? So it's only one way. Obviously, it presumes and it simplifies a design. And it's obviously only one way that the project can be designed, that project can be successfully designed to deliver what's expected, right? But it does give you something to cost that's real and is buildable. So you take it's not speculating about what's to be priced, right? But rather saying, well, this is, if we were to build this building, here's one way to build it, and this is what it would cost to do it. Okay? So it works by embedding algorithms and formulas used by architects and engineers to move from, I want to be able to hear a pin drop from any seat in the theater, to the material and labor costs of components and systems. Change the requirement and the estimate changes accordingly. Just two examples of those formulas. So it says here that if you're trying to look at the number of light fixtures or luminaires that's needed is based on illuminance required. There's a formula for determining that. And so the conclusion is it's not necessary to produce first a design solution to count the number of light fixtures or the size of the main switchboard or etc., as this is exactly how the designers determine those numbers. This is for lifts, right? Elevators in US speak. Okay. So now let's look at, so a question that would naturally come to mind is, well, what's the implication for design? What's left for design to do, right? And what I'd like to, well, I'm pleased to report that there is something left for design to do. And let's get to my list here. Minute. This is pretty good. Okay. Yeah. That went past. Bear with me 1 second. I'm getting there. I don't have that slide. I'm almost there. I promise. Okay. So, I've dug into it, and I've even had some of these documents that were written and published in Finnish translated so that I could see them, read them. And one of them is a report by an architect called Niukinen. And he did this study, I think, back in maybe in 1980 or shortly thereafter. And it was a study looking at the relationship between cost and architectural qualities of design solutions. And he did it using a design competition, right? And so all of the dots on the figure, on the graph, are designs, and they all meet all functional and functional requirements of the building, right? But what they're being evaluated on is their architectural quality. And so he uses this as an argument that that I think we might conclude simply from the fact of the success of value engineering's function analysis, right? As if it were always the case that spending more money got you better quality, right? Or always the case that spending less got you less quality, then we would be very limited in what we could do relative to cost. But in fact, if you look here, the most expensive one was not by any means, it's more or less middle of the range in terms of architectural quality, in fact, a little bit below. And the one that had the best architectural quality, according to the judges, was right in the middle for cost, right? So the steering range, and that's one of the questions to answer about Hattala's model, or model maker, right? It's not itself a model, it's a machine for making models, or a software for making models. But how do you situate it so that to provide the, so you know that the design range is, design alternatives are rich, right? Sufficiently rich that you can succeed in finding a way of meeting functional requirements while meeting architectural quality, right? And, and that'll be explained in the book. Now, there's another one too, and this is from the US, and it's the name of their model maker is Building Catalyst, and they use a different approach. This is on the right-hand side is the list of companies that are contributing cost data, and several of those people or those companies are on my research team. So DPR, Bolt, see, I can't read behind some of these things, but so at any rate, so they're using this cost data. It's anonymized, right? So you don't know which data comes from which project. But what they do is they also start from functions, desired functionalities and capacities of the building to be designed and constructed. And they use statistical analysis to allocate, and also like Hattala's approach software, they use engineering logic. That is a relationship of what's not seen that has cost items that are necessary in order to deliver functionality. And they promised me that they have achieved highly successful accuracy in delivering projects to their target cost, but I haven't yet seen the data. But I will soon. Okay? But it looks very promising. Okay, this is again from Building Catalyst. So they, and as like Hattala does, they're very sensitive to the fact that you can't really use building type by itself very successfully as a way of estimating cost, because buildings tend to have multiple different types of functions within them. And even within a department, like within a cancer center, you can say, well, what about radiation oncology, right? And then that has different cost elements or functionally related things that have costs, right? So you have to be able to understand, this is again, I think both of them are exemplify the process of trying to really work from the voice of the customer to the voice of the engineer right, to the cost. So, and then within radiation oncology, it produces this kind of information, right? Or it breaks it down in this way. And you can see that SF is square foot. You would probably have square meters, right? And then it generates these kinds of numbers. Right? And then, unlike TACU, at least as yet, Building Catalyst doesn't allow being very precise about the voice of the customer is limited. And so as an example of what I mean by that, in TACU, you can say, well, for this type of space within the building, this is how I want the temperature to be controlled, right? And and if you change that range, that setting, then that changes cost. But whereas Building Catalyst uses average settings for those kinds of decisions. But they get this kind of data, quantities, square feet. Right? So as I say, we're publishing a book to include more detailed explanations that are possible here, together with chapters describing how an owner, an agency CM, a design firm, and a main contractor do TVD. And we've committed to deliver the manuscript to the publisher by the end of March. So that's what I'll be doing for the next 4 months. So, okay, now here I am on, this is a response to a question I got from, we requested questions and I got a few. How does risk management figure in the TVD process? So here's my answer. Risks and opportunities are assessed and mitigations incorporated into a project execution plan prior to making a go, no-go decision. If the remaining risk is considered acceptable, the project is often compared to competing investment opportunities. May or may not be. If it survives that test, it is funded. In the course of project delivery, the project radar is always on, searching for risks and opportunities on the path toward completion. And I think I mentioned this in my presentation on the last planner system, that the important plan is your plan to complete from wherever you are in the project relative to where you want to end up, right? And so the CPM fantasy that you can predict well in advance, right, over many, many days and many different complicating circumstances, exactly the path of the project is just a fantasy. So we have to actually deliver the project by rethinking it every moment as going forward, right? And that's hard work, but that's why they chose us to do it, right? So how do you handle unknown unknowns when working estimations for a new project? So I'm going to read it just to be sure I get it right. So if unknown unknowns can be made known, and that's a big if, right? Because provision can be made for them in the project execution plan and the cost for doing so incorporated into the project cost estimate. Made known means understanding uncertainty well enough to size countermeasures to it. For example, a more exact demand forecast for some function to be performed in or with a constructed asset might still be lacking when the project needs to start. Options can be developed and evaluated to see if the cost, time or money, is worth the expected benefit. And I've provided an example of that in the webinar on the last planner system. If unknown unknowns cannot be made known, the best that can be done is to make the project team more flexible to change. Organizational integration, aligned commercial interest, and increasing psychological safety have been shown to increase flexibility. How does TBD account for changes in a project? In my experience, this is the questioner. In my experience, no project's design ends the same as it began. True. So this To note, the client can change targets during the course of project delivery, but commercial terms should be structured so that the service providers do not suffer financially, and that's embedded in contracts like the integrated form of agreement. But thinking about changes, so it wasn't quite clear. It wasn't clear, of course, from the question just as stated what kind of changes we're talking about. So changes in design tend to happen that provide a better solution than one previously agreed. That doesn't necessarily change project targets, but such changes may require a reallocation of target costs to the cross-functional TVD teams. An example might be to agree a different type of structural design that is more expensive, but the reduction in MEP cost is expected to be greater than the increase in cost for the structure. Alternatively, a change in MEP design might reduce operations and maintenance costs and thus warrant an increase in allowable cost. That would constitute a change in targets. So am I answering your question, whoever asked it? And I should have asked the same thing on the previous one.
If you are not, then the ones asking the questions are welcome to comment.
Right.
Feel free to raise your hand or.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm going to go on, but
Yeah.
maybe they're trying to figure out how to do it. That could be. Okay. Now there are some other questions, I think from Hans Thomas, were good questions, but I'm thinking that I've answered them in the course of the presentation. But Hans, if I haven't, ask again or ask a more pointed one.
Yes. Hi again, Glenn. You showed actually on slide 2 you had a worth and cost model, and that is really what my third question in this way is asking. And how can you create transparency in the way of tools, and can you show a defined group of people, critical mass of people maybe in a project, that this is where we are, this is where we're going, instead of having it maybe on a PC that you close and everyone forgets about it? But how can you make the transparency so good so people are reminded about it every day? And that's why then the awareness in a project team.
Well, I showed the example from I've showed different examples actually that might be relevant, and they're computer generated, but they can be posted as photographs, right, and are all over the project, right, and changed out periodically, so that we have a better sense about where we are and where we're going.
But it's around the difference between value engineering and value management, and then target value design, because every time I'm trying to explain the difference, I seem to fail.
Well, I think that the difference between value engineering and value management is really an expression of a different understanding about the objective, right? But you can educate me about that, Randy.
Yeah, so value management and value engineering is very commonly known, at least in the UK as well, and we're using that on several projects there. But then when I'm trying to discuss with them target value design or delivery, it seems like they always fall down and talk about value management instead then.
I think that it may not matter which term. The question is what process, right?
Yeah.
Or by value management, do they propose that they're achieving what target value delivery does?
Yeah, I think Glenn, that when you try to explain new concepts to people, they tend to go back to what they know. And,
sure.
Value engineering, value management has their own institute in UK and is a standard that is widely known. That is what they understand. So the question is whether or not there is a difference that we need to explain sometimes there.
Yeah, well, I mean, you could easily do an assessment, right? Just using that list of characteristics of TVD that I gave earlier or showed earlier, and say, look at, well, what's, with someone familiar with value management, which of these are holds for value management? That'd be a starting point.
And then I think a bit of that point was also that one thing is to talk about cost, and I think you also briefly touched on that. Now with sustainability, we have multiple baselines that we need to manage. So right. I think there's a lot of extra dimensions to this that we need to work on in the future as well.
No, exactly. So it's because targets are not. Its cost is just what you can afford to spend to get what you want. But what you want is over. It can be over the moon, right? But then should be, right? They really should have multiple objectives, seeing the impact that projects have on the world, right? Right.
But again, sorry, just one thing comment on that, and then you can move on to someone else. But again, in UK, we are now working with carbon baselines, and they are just as important as the cost baseline. So you have a budget for both, and you need to design towards a target for both, and they are, of course, sometimes conflicting. And that I think is making it very interesting to work with target value delivery.
Mm-hmm. No, exactly. I mean, target value delivery doesn't reduce the challenge of designing and constructing anything, right? But it provides a way to meet those challenges. Right? But it's always going to be hard work. I mean, I go back to the image of a ship at sea, right? It's really easy to be a good sailor when it's calm weather, but it's really stresses your capabilities when you're in stormy seas.
Absolutely.
But we need good craft, and we need good craftsmanship in order to do that. So, and I think TVD is part of that toolkit.
A very similar question to Randy. You said that in its origin, target costing came from quantity surveying. So I was wondering how does this differ now, or how did target costing or target value design deviate from the work of quantity surveyors?
Well, they didn't really have a process that was effective for doing the steps in target value delivery or target value design, right? That's the challenge. They came up with the idea, but according to their own words concerning the accuracy of their conceptual estimating methods, they couldn't. I mean, how can you set a target based upon an estimate that's somewhere between 20% low and 30% high, right? I mean, what? I mean, that would be absurd. So I think they just didn't. They had the idea, but they didn't deliver on the idea, right? So that's what I'm.
Also, I think I'm not sure if it's for every, but for Danish consultants, I think. Mainly for architects, they're very good at design, but also I think they have some of them have a reputation of being quite poor at pricing or estimating costs. So if they have to design to steering towards a target, they have quite difficult with this because they're so focused on design. So my question is, who will you set in charge of this this process in order to steer for the target?
Well, who's responsible for it?
Yeah, I think that maybe designers need management in this process. So
well, if you take what Hatala does is they're an agency CM, so they don't have cost risk, but as they say, our risk is in our reputation, right? but so what they do is they don't make design decisions, but they provide the feedback about the cost implications of a design. right?
Hmm.
And they said that they told me that when they first started doing that way back in the 1980s, even before they had computers, that designers were initially very resistant. But over time, they came to understand that this actually helped them because, for one thing, they weren't making the design, the cost estimating, the cost estimates themselves, right? But were provided that information.
Hmm.
And, you know, and they were given the opportunity. It wasn't just if the design alternative that was being cost estimated was beyond the allocated portion of the target cost, that didn't close the question. You could then go on to argue, look, it goes beyond the cost, but it provides these benefits, including cost benefits to other aspects of the building or the other aspects of the asset to be constructed, whatever it is, right? So it just informs the conversation. But I think you're right. I think that, some design firms are getting much better at managing costs. And that's why I've included one in the, it's HDR based in Omaha, Nebraska, is the biggest healthcare design firm, I think, in the world. And they do more than healthcare, but I've included them in the book because I want to see what different players within the process do within the target value delivery process, or can do.
Hmm. I think it's quite, we have quite a strong focus, or somewhat focus on this in Denmark now, as there's been new regulations setting up more responsibility for designers, that they have to design within cost constraints.
Hmm.
So, and otherwise they will be held accountable if they don't. So there's a new focus for designers in being able to doing this. And I think we have some quantity surveyors trying to bid into managing this, but I think target value design is another or similar way, and quite interesting in the setup we have in Denmark.
We for sure got a lot of inspiration for our discussions in the Lean Construction Study Group, I'm sure, and also for the project in Værdibyg on budgeting and steering a budget. So thanks a lot for that, Glenn.
Mm-hmm.
Wanted to get your opinion or your experience regarding sharing financial information across participants in a project.
Mm-hmm.
That, to my knowledge, is very difficult because they all have unique spreadsheets with their unique formulas, and reporting and sharing information is very time-consuming and difficult.
Right.
To your experience, how is there any projects you know of where the participants can decide on a common system for actually handling financial data, invoices, and so on?
Yeah, that's really part of this integrated project delivery approach. And over time, we've discovered, made some discoveries through experience. That's just experience tends to be a really strict taskmaster. If you remember that slide about the Eden Hospital project, it was the first Sutter Health acute care hospital, and it looked like it was going to go great. It looked like everyone was going to wind up, all the risk and reward pool member companies were going to maximize their profits. But near the end of the project, it turned out that the electrical contractor had made a serious mistake in forecasting their cost to complete. And it was so serious that it took 20%, it reduced by 20% everyone's profit share. Okay. And what that made them realize was, hey, you know, in any other normal project, I'd say I'm the mechanical contractor. I would never have thought about questioning the electrical contractor's information, right? Because they were pursuing their own profit objectives and I was pursuing my own profit objectives, right? And the interdependency of those is concealed in traditional project delivery, but it's still there, right? So it made this problem of the issue of shared governance really came to the fore. And on the later project, in fact, we described this in a different technical report from the Project Production Systems Laboratory. What they did, they were led actually by the mechanical contractor's project manager. And what they started doing was before they developed their pay app request to the client, which is done on a monthly basis, all of those companies met together and reviewed each other's numbers. And they moved towards one shared system, right? So that they could understand each other. And they scrubbed their own team members' numbers before they went to the client, right? And that took that problem off the board.
Exactly. Yeah.
So there's a lot, you know, this is not, TBD is like all interesting things, right? Can go.
Yeah.
And we learn more all the time. Right?
Yeah, because I have quite some. Sometimes I have suggested that we open the books completely. I mean, 100% by signing in all participants in the same platform with the same rights, with the same viewing rights. I mean, everybody can see everybody's calculations and invoices and profits and rest amount.
It wasn't that they all had the same way of doing it, but they all shared that same information. Yeah,
completely.
But standard way would be right.
But and trying to work that way, I must say.
Yeah.
Okay,
but,
thank you.
But people won't change until they realize that they can make more money by doing it a different way, right?
Exactly.
So you just have to. That's true.
Yeah.
And also, it can be partly driven by owners, right? So just what demands they make. Say, look, if you want access to my capital spending, you're going to have to do it this way.
Exactly.
They're making demands, right, that aren't simply to their own benefit, but have benefits to the people they're making the demands on.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
Somehow I feel like that I'm coming from the construction side, you know, the constructor side, and I do understand. That we do not wish to share our profits and whole our calculation because I do feel that a lot of these companies are in this world to create more profit. Now, in these terms here, as I see it, it's almost, you know, you're not allowed to earn more by your own efficiency, so to say, and you just have to share it with others. Actually, I think all the contractors I know, all my network is interested in that they can create projects, they can eliminate the risks, create the necessary platform to execute a project successfully and create their own earnings. And I believe somehow that's actually why, you know, people don't want to share. I'm working with a lot of models, and one of the models that I'm working with is, you know, to create this kind of model which eliminates a lot of risks before the contract. I think it's possible, but I do understand that there are too many actors involved. It can be a big task. But that's my view, actually. I do not hope that I've just said the opposite of what you're talking about.
I'm not sure, but you are reminding me of a story that it's relevant, I think. So in probably sometime in 1999, I was still running with my good friend Greg Howell, unfortunately now deceased, but the Lean Construction Institute in the United States. And we had a call from a guy named Owen Matthews from Orlando, Florida. And he called to tell us about a company, a new company that he had formed by joining his company with other companies. Okay. And he called that new company Integrated Project Delivery. So, which was also this. And he was explaining to us, we of course were interested to know, well, what does this company do and how was it formed and why did you do it? And it made it really, he had already told us some things that were really made his response interesting, surprising and interesting. He said, look, we had worked on and off, many of these individuals and companies had worked on and off together in and around the Orlando, Florida area, 20 to 30 years. There had been there were some close friendships involved. There was even some intermarriage, right? Okay. And so you would expect that this would be the ideal situation in which people would be willing to make compromises, right? It's a give and take, right? Mm-hmm. And he explained that he had formed this company from putting together an architectural firm, a structural engineering, an electrical engineering firm, a mechanical engineering firm, a general contractor, and the corresponding specialty contracting firms, right? Electrical, mechanical, structural. And they agreed that they were going to share risks and rewards. Okay. And they had their accountants meet apart from them, apart from anyone else in their companies, and just come to agreement about how to share those risks and rewards. And basically, no matter how they delivered the project, whatever their contract was with the client, they had the contract within themselves that said, we're going to share profits and losses, whichever come up, right, in this pre-agreed formula. And it wasn't a fixed formula, but rather it was a function of what was the stake, what stake each one had in the game, right, in each project. And so when we asked him, well, why did you do that? I mean, that sounds interesting, but why did you do that? He said, well, we all agreed that the problem facing the challenge that making construction industry improvement substantial and continuing is the problem of who pays and who gains. Mm-hmm. And that was the starting point for integrated project delivery, right? Mm-hmm. As a movement, not just as a company. They used it, right, to structure it, but it can be different ways, done in different ways. But if you take that seriously, because when you're going to make when you're working, the more dynamic and uncertain the environment in which, the more stormy the seas in which your ship is, right, the more you need to collaborate, right? To give and take is absolutely essential, right? And the problem is that as long as our financial fortunes are independent of one another, or seemingly independent, right, we're not going to have much flex, not much ability to be flexible, right? Okay, so you might say, I've always been amazed at how flexible people actually are. I was working with a building envelope company, and I substituted for the foreman one day because the foreman was all sick or something, and I noticed that we were roofing, doing a PVC type roofing material, and on a building at the San Francisco airport. And I noticed that the iron workers were working ahead of us, laying down the metal sheets that constituted the roof element, right? But he was doing it, if you think of this as the roof line, okay, he was doing it in parallel to the roof line. And PVC you can't apply it that way. We would have had to wait until he completed the whole damn side of it in order to be able to move forward. So I just went and talked to that foreman and I said, hey, here's how we've got to work. Could you just do your work in a way that allows us to eat the building up progressively, right? You just stay ahead of me and I'll stay right behind you. Sure. Because it didn't cost him anything to do it a different way. But if it had cost him something different, then he would have said, sorry, but I've got to protect my company. I've got to protect, and my company has to protect its, they have fiduciary responsibility to their employees, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think we're really onto something in saying the problem in construction is who pays, who gains. And if we can take that problem off the board, we can make much faster advance.
So you don't see that the actors, let's see, the subcontractors and the suppliers should be taken to the design phase together with the advisors, there's the architects and the engineers, and create the project, eliminate the risks, create it so it's workable and buildable. And once you then get the contract where you have eliminated a lot of the risks, you are going into a safe zone into the execution. And when you reach the execution, there are some changes, or there are some different, some of the things you want to do where you need to take stand on whether we should pay or gain. You can, of course, make those changes with this kind of mind. But before you go into the contract, before you go into the execution, is it not possible to many of these risks?
Oh, exactly right. Exactly right. And that's what's done in a integrated project delivery approach, is that the members of the risk pool are all selected and engaged prior to the project being approved. And they participate in generating and evaluating a project execution plan precisely for risk and opportunity, right? And that's because they're taking on the risk, right? Right. They're sharing that risk with the client. And so you're expecting to have reduced some of it, but I think it would just be kind of looking at the world with rose-colored glasses, right? To think that we're going to reduce it all, right? So you have to have some incentive for people to collaborate, deeply collaborate, right, in order to bring that ship to harbor. Right?
Thank you.
We have 16 minutes by my clock.
That's right. And maybe.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we all have to use a little time to consume all the information we got today. I think here in Denmark, we are using some of the elements in IPD and maybe, as I see it after today, some of the elements in TVD as well, but maybe not as full package in the construction sector yet. So maybe we'll be back some time next year with more questions for this process and this.
I hope I'll be able to come to Copenhagen again in my life.
Oh, we would love that very, very much. That's for sure.
Me too. I have many good friends there.
But if there is no more questions or comments, then
I would just like to say that please, Glenn, don't take Morten's word for that. Danes usually take 1 year to consume 2 hours of information. That's simply not the general statistics here.
Well, I just hope it's useful to you.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, thank you.
It really was, and I hope I didn't say a year, but next year, that's
That's almost over.
Just a month. Yeah.
You're obviously welcome to Norway as well, although my background picture is from somewhere else, just to cheer everyone else up.
Well, as you know, I spent 5 years going to Norway twice a year for NTNU. So
Yeah,
NTNU, I should.
Yes.
And I miss them too. So, all right. Well, hopefully we'll see each other again in person.
We really hope so, Glenn. So now it's time for me, on behalf on the DBUG and Lean Construction Denmark, to say thank you very, very much, Glenn. And thanks to all the participants today. And then hope to see you again soon.
Okay. All right. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.